So what I wanted to do was to share some experiences with you of Goethean inquiry in practice, because it's really when we hear stories and we hear about other people's experiences, I think, that actually help to solidify our own and to help us to situate ourselves in the story of the world and in this particular approach and gesture towards the world. Again, I don't like calling Goethean inquiry a methodology, even though I probably did use methodology a few slides back. It's more a sense of a living inquiry, a kind of open gesture in relationship with the world. And this, it's about relatedness, it's about relationship and participation with the more than human world and with the world itself. And this is from Stephen Harrod Booner. I don't know whether any of you know his work. It's called Plant Intelligence and the Imaginal Realm. He says, "Yesterday, as I sat among the rock formations and trees of the Gila, I felt a change come upon me. I could feel the soul of that place as a delicate feather touch upon all my senses, and in that moment a light began to emanate from every stone, every plant and tree, even the soil itself. I dropped then into a silence as deep and still as any I have known. And as I listened, I began to hear, as Aldo Leopold said I would, the music that lies deep within these hills. It seemed as if I had come home to a place I had always known, the place in which my true family resides. I felt companioned and loved. As I began to look deeper, I could sense, even see, the living connections between everything around me. There were golden threads moving through the world, weaving all the apparently separate organisms and objects together. I reached out and touched the nearest, and a certain feeling came over me. And suddenly I realized I could follow that feeling through my enhanced sensing home to where it originated, deep in the foundations of the world." And as I read that, I just thought, oh my goodness, that is such a sort of a present, visceral, living experience of the world itself. And as I practice more and more Goethean inquiry, I feel that I know that world that he's talking about. Maybe not in the same way, but in my way, through the imaginal methodologies, or again, there's that word, the imaginal approaches, the imaginal gesture that I've had the privilege of being able to sort of develop throughout my journey with Goethean inquiry and my own process of heart sense. And every time I read it, it just touches me so deeply. And again, this is from one of the students actually who did the Masters in Holistic Science about 3 years before I did. And she was writing about a nettle. She was sitting with a nettle plant, and she was with this nettle plant all year. And then she had an experience of the plant itself. And I'd just like to read this to you. "One day I sat down with a particular nettle, sat in a patch of many others, and I felt a really strong star-like quality. It is very hard to describe, but it felt like an enormous spreading, shining sensation, like an expanding force of intense energy. I intuited it as a gesture of the wholeness of the plant, a wholeness that I could then recognize in parts of the plant, such as the force of the sting that you feel when touching the small syringe-like stinging hairs, the shape and expression of the thousands of tiny hairs seemingly bursting out of the plant with this immense energy, the pattern of spikes on the leaf edges, which feel like they are dynamically spreading outwards with a purpose. The whole plant felt like a star that was shining, a wonderful experience to participate in." So this student, this sort of colleague of mine, actually felt the wholeness of the nettle. She felt this plant viscerally in every part of her being, and had a sense of all of these different parts of the plant coming together to show her nettle in its authenticity. And I'm using nettle there with a capital N, and I'm not putting the in front of it. This is nettle. This is living being nettle, who is showing herself to this student who has a direct experience of this beautiful plant. Incredible. And she'd been going back to this plant, I think, for many, many months over the course of the Masters. And I'm sure you'll agree, with me that this is, you know, sort of visceral experience. And then to share my experience, I had great difficulty actually sinking into imaginal practice, because I think I was so dominated in a way by a sort of very narrow left brain, if we want to use those terms, way of thinking. And that was just the way I was oriented in the world. But I knew that there was something that I needed to move more deeply into. So I was determined to sort of practice Goethean inquiry, but nothing would come to me. So you've shared with me these most beautiful experiences this afternoon of what took place for you. I had nothing. For 5 days, I tried this experience with this groundsel plant. Every single day, I just sat there and nothing came. On the 5th day, one of the students, helpers on the course, because I was getting really upset at this point, one of the student helpers on the course came to, I went to her and I said, look, I can't do this process. I have no idea how it works. I don't know what is being asked of me or what to do. And she just said to me, Louise, what would it be like to sit with that difficulty? And I thought, okay. So I went out into the courtyard and I think I just sat there, just about to cry, really, through sheer desperation and just feeling like I was a fraud and I shouldn't be on this course. And then I've shared this with some of you before, but I can't explain exactly because words don't do it justice, the experience. But as I write here, Groundsel suddenly showed me how her existence and transformation was strengthened by her intimate relationships with the environment around her. So I saw the warmth of the sun on her leaves and the richness of the soil blanketing her roots, and knew through these non-judgmental, loving, reciprocal relationships, just a knowing, it was a deep sense of knowing that she gives voice to the warmth of the sun. And if you see what happened there, my silence, she'd converted into her voice. It was, I mean, I'm getting goosebumps again talking about it. She took my silence and she spoke to me. That was how it felt. She gave voice to the warmth of the sun, the richness of the earth, and the life-giving power of the rain. And that was what helped her to bring forth these beautiful, intricate leaves over time, developing and growing through a process of transformation and finally yielding into a delicate yellow flower. And I had a living, visceral sense of the direct expression of wholeness of nature living through her in that moment. I can't explain it better than that, but it was massive for me. It transformed my life. And from that point, it was like nature started just communicating with me, and it just sort of hasn't shut up since, really. It's just so beautiful. And it sort of led me into a sort of philosophy, which, as I say, I've taken forward in my own research. So I just thought you'd like to sort of hear a few sort of direct examples of Goethean inquiry in practice, as well as your own beautiful, beautiful sharing. So really what we're doing then is, when we're moving into this mode of inquiry, we're entering into a relationship and we are allowing phenomena to speak. We are inviting, first of all, with curiosity. And then what we're doing is we're allowing the subjects of our inquiry to speak the way that they want to speak. And as Holdridge says, the dynamics of knowing, they really depend on what question we ask. So as we moved out into the world in the exercise today, you know, what does our little plant or tree want to show us today? How does it want to speak to us today? And in that sense, how can we, when we ask that question, how can we become better, more transparent instruments of knowing? And it's by actually cultivating these ways of knowing and being. So how we gesture towards and approach our engagement with the question is equally as important. And again, just a sort of reminder of this idea of relationship. As Holdridge says here, questioning is a relational, dynamic act of inquiry. And a question is a movement. It shows that you've been touched by something and are moved to explore a relationship with that something, to know it more deeply, to ask the world or a plant or a tree or an animal or another person, how do they want to be in the world today? That shows that you've moved into that other space. And this is particularly what interests me in my work with Heart Sense. How do we move into that space with others? You know, clearly Goethe was coming from the point of view of relationship with the natural world, but this, I feel, as a philosophy doesn't stop with the natural world. We can actually move into the world with this philosophy in relationship with any other. That could be any sort of other in the more than human world, with another person, with ourselves even, you know, when we're feeling conflicted, for example, to sort of bring more of our authenticness, more of our wholeness into presence without sort of shutting the other down before it's had a chance to tell us all about itself. So in this mode of inquiry, whoever it is that you're in relationship becomes an active participant with you in conversation. So you come to know the other for itself and not what you think you know about it already. So the question that you ask, this is so important, can form seeds of a living inquiry or a dead pile of preconceived facts. It really depends on the kind of question that we ask. And I'm just showing this little picture of berries here because I'm reminded of a session on Goethean Enquiry that I ran for some first year psychology students a couple of years ago on the when I was teaching at Canterbury on my PhD. And they literally just had like 15 minutes to come and do the session. But I was amazed within just 15 minutes that a group of students actually looked at a holly bush, and they were saying, they were looking at how the leaves were actually covering the berries, keeping them safe. And I said to one of the students, I said, have you ever looked at a plant in this way before? Would you have ever talked about a plant in that way and about, you know, the leaves, keeping the berries safe in this way? Maybe so they don't become, you know, ruined by the rain or predators or whatever. And this student said no, and it's actually really shifted my perception. Even just a tiny little 15-minute inquiry like that, that group of students went off seeing the world differently. It's just phenomenal, really.